Start your show now, press 1.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Using gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other nefarious tactics, the Republican Party has manipulated our electoral system to maintain as much control as possible despite being a party in the minority. Liberal Dan Radio seeks to change that, and I need your help in doing so. Liberal Dan Radio has partnered with Levelfield to help us use tools that are typically only available to big money donors. When you go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution, it will encourage other voters to reach out to their legislators to pass legislation to stop gerrymandering and voter suppression, and target elected officials who refuse to protect the vote. Every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot, and that ballot should have the same power as everyone else. I can't do this alone. I need your help. So please go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution today. That's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Political advertising paid for by Levelfield. Contributions are not tax deductible as charitable contributions.
Welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, the number is 914-803-4131. That is 914-803-4131. If you are listening live on the Blog Talk Radio network on blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan, if you sign in with your free blogtalkradio.com account, you can go to the episode page and join us in that chat room. And if you're watching live on YouTube at youtube.com/liberaldanradio, you can also join the chat room there as well. And if you're listening after the live broadcast, you could always leave your comments, questions, concerns, etc. over on the show thread at liberaldan.com, facebook.com/liberaldan, at liberaldanradio on Twitter, or the comment thread on YouTube as well. The bottom half of the hour, we're going to be inviting on lawyer Ken Good, who had reached out and wanted to talk about bail reform and charitable bail funds on the show, and I thought it was an interesting topic that needed to be covered, and we're going to be hearing from both sides of the issue on this point. We'll be hopefully talking to Mr. Good at the bottom half of the hour about that topic. I'm sorry that if you tuned in last week and I wasn't here, that's because I was feeling like a pile of hot garbage. My kid got sick, and I thought I caught the Rona. I thought I got COVID. I did have an upper respiratory infection that went and became a lower respiratory infection. So if I cough a little bit during the show, I have cough drops. I have a bunch of water to drink from to make sure that I can keep myself well hydrated and my throat moist. But the cough is getting better. It's reduced significantly since the weekend. And I got a little bit of hoarseness on, but I think I can power through it and do the show. My son did test positive for COVID. He caught it at school. School has not yet switched to everybody being required. The city of New Orleans is requiring everybody to be vaccinated for COVID-19 in public schools starting February 1st. So he has another week for that to take place. But everybody else in my house tested negative. So either we got that new stealth COVID, the stealth variant of Omicron that is maybe harder to detect on the tests, or maybe we just happen to also maybe he also had transmitted an upper respiratory infection to us on top of the COVID. Maybe it was just a regular old flu that the flu shot didn't stop. Maybe it was another strain of the flu. So who knows? But I felt like garbage for the last week, and it wasn't fun. And I've turned the corner. I think I'm doing better. So there's that. So I'm back, and hopefully I won't be too bogged down with everything, and hopefully I won't get too much of the crazy coughs like I was having over the week. I mean, I coughed pretty hard. I felt like I cracked my rib. That's how hard I coughed on Sunday. It was pretty bad. So, but I think I feel much better. So that's always a good thing. So, and then everybody else in my house seems to be. And it's funny, my youngest son, the one who actually had tested positive for COVID, maybe it was a false positive, I don't know. Those do happen as well. But he was not really affected at all. And I think I will attribute that, at least partially, to the fact that he's fully vaccinated. So he's protected. So he's not going to have the symptoms that someone else might have. So there you go. And they're always getting tested regularly. The Hypocrite of the Week, which will be, not the Hypocrite of the Week, the Words of Redneck Wisdom, which will be uploaded during the commercial break, does have an interesting topic about the testing segment, because I'd called in last week or 2 weeks ago to Jeff Carrera's show and asked them about why they have an issue with testing. Like, I don't agree with them on vaccines, but I understand their disagreement with vaccines. I don't agree with them with masking. I understand why they're opposed to masking. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's based on any sort of logic or reason. But I understand the argument. I don't understand the argument as to why they're opposed to testing. And, well, this week's Words of Redneck Wisdom is going to let us all know, at least one individual, why she believes that the testing is harmful. And why she is opposed to testing, and it's more than what you would probably just simply guess. But speaking of Jeff, let's go ahead and play this week's Hypocrite of the Week before we get to anything else.
This week's Hypocrite of the Week is Jeff Carrera, who claims to oppose gerrymandering, but on today's program said that Louisiana can't allow Democrats to have another seat, despite the map being drawn in such a way that denies Louisiana proper representation. To see if your state fails to represent its voters properly, go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. And to see who next week's Hypocrite of the Week will be, tune in to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Central on blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan.
And there you go. Yeah, he was talking about the push in Louisiana to redistrict, and Governor Edwards is wanting to make sure that Louisiana does have not only 2 Democratic districts, but 2 minority districts. And Jeff Carrera was adamantly opposed to the idea, because you don't want to give the Democrats additional seat, which is in direct opposition to much of his previous comments. Of course, he doesn't like the fact that the 1st congressional district is drawn in such a way that it just winds up the river, and it's very oddly shaped. But the reason it's so oddly shaped is because they shoved all the black voters into one district, so that they could they shoved all the black voters in one district so that they could reduce the power of the Democrats in the state, and that's the purpose for it. And then I've covered Louisiana. I haven't done any new ones recently because of me being sick and some other issues that I've been dealing with, but we'll get back to making those series of videos soon. So if you go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com, you can support the effort, and so we can go and educate people as to which states do a good job of representing their voters properly in Congress. And there are some blue states that don't do it well. There are some red states that don't do it well. And we'll see at the end of the day who has the overall net advantage when it comes to that, when it comes to how many seats they have an advantage of based off of their population within the states. Bringing Boy mentions that California has problems, and I'll tell you 2 things, 2 spoilers about the California video, which will be the last video. Whatever is happening in California, that it basically, I think it cuts the Republican advantage in half. So you'll get to California, you get to the right before California, you'll finish up Texas, I believe, and then the Republicans will have like a 30 seat lead, and California will cut that lead in half. So if it wasn't for California, the Republicans would have even more ridiculous advantage. But California also has a bipartisan faction where you have, I think, four Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 4 other people as part of the commission that's in charge of drawing the districts. So it's not a purely partisan map. Now, does California adequately represent the will of the people with that map? No, it doesn't. But at the end of the day, California prevents the country from being even more lopsided than it already is. So am I going to criticize California in and of itself for what it does? Sure. But I'm also going to look at it within the context of the fact that it may be the biggest state, so therefore it may have the biggest disproportionate numbers when it comes to the seats. So it might be the biggest overall, guilty party when it comes to not representing its citizens properly. But overall, the red states combined are combined much worse than all of the blue states combined. And that's going to be the overall point. Again, spoiler alert. So, there's Bringing a Boy. He says, try filters when you smoke your cigs. I don't smoke cigarettes, so nope. I do not haven't smoked one in a very long time. So, what else we got? I'm not doing an official headlines this week, but some big news coming out. I was listening to Jeff's show this morning, and they were talking about how he doesn't believe that there is a conservative majority on the court. He believes that there are 3 conservatives, 3 moderates, and 3 liberals on the court. He doesn't think the court is conservative enough. And when he was talking about this, I was basically going, man, Breyer just needs to resign. He needs to step down to allow Joe Biden to replace him now, because we don't need another what happened to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she should have resigned during Obama's term and didn't, especially when Obama had control of the Senate. And then what happened? Hours later, he announced that he is going to be resigning this term so that Joe Biden can replace him with a Democratic Senate. So there's a short list of people that people assume are going to be on that list. One name that people tout that I think is off the list that MSNBC was trying to say was Vice President Harris as a possibility of being the replacement on the court, which would fit his criteria of his promise that he would appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court. It would be interesting, though, because if no Republicans go along with it, then it would be 50-50. And what happens? Does she have to vote for herself to break the tie? That would be interesting. That would be crazy. But let's see. Bringing a Boy says, but he helps the numbers when a vote leans to the left. Who helps the numbers when a vote leans to the left? What are you talking about? Anyway, so I don't think it's going to be Harris. I think that there are other people who are going to be presented, and we'll go over the nominations, the nomination when it happens. And I don't want to jump ahead of myself. Brewer, Brewer is one of the leftists on the Supreme Court. Yes, he is part of the liberal wings. I don't know who you're talking about, Brenner, but. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see that happening. Also, New Orleans Saints have lost their head coach. Sean Payton is resigned. He is retiring, at least at the moment. He's taking the year off, supposedly, from coaching. He may want to do other things. He said he might come back to coaching at some point. Who knows for whom that might be or when that might be. However, there's lots of Saints fans that are very distraught at the idea that, we're going to suck again because we don't have Sean Payton. Of course, when Dennis Allen had to take over for one of the games this season because Sean Payton had COVID-19, we beat Tom Brady and the Bucs. So they were the reigning, defending Super Bowl champions, and we beat them twice again this season, short-staffed with our big defense. So I think if we can keep Dennis Allen and keep him, in charge of this hard-hitting defense, that we're always going to have a chance. And hopefully we don't have as many COVID issues, injury issues, and storm issues like we had this past year. Yeah, Justice Brewer is stepping off the bench. So he is Breyer is stepping off the bench. Say Brewer, but Breyer. Just as Breyer is stepping off the bench. You had me confused with Brenner. You had me all discombobulated. Bringing boy, you can't do that when I'm fighting my sickness. I'm not 100% mentally, I guess. I don't know. So let's see. Let's go ahead and take the first commercial break. We'll come back, take your calls as well. Of course, at the bottom half of the hour, we're welcoming Ken Good on the program. 914-803-4131. That is 914-803-4131. This is Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.
Are you planning a trip to Disney soon? Do you want help avoiding spending mistakes and making the most of your vacation? Then check out Budgeteers.com, a new site devoted to helping you get the most mouse for your money. What kinds of tickets should you get? Is the dining plan a good deal for you? Should you stay on grounds or not? Should you buy park hoppers? Many other sites are filled with information about what other people like to do, but Budgeteers is geared to help you make the best decision for you. So check out Budgeteers.com or go to youtube.com/Budgeteers and help make your trip the best it can be. Budgeteers.com is not a travel agency and it is not affiliated with the Disney Corporation or any of its holdings. In a world gone mad, one progressive will do a bad movie trailer guy impression to get you to listen to his show. There's only one thing that I like better than the Liberal Dan Radio minicast. Alright, Bill, that's enough of that. On the Liberal Dan Radio minicast, you will hear an honest discussion of the day's issues, with some personal bits in between. You might even hear what the other side has to say, sometimes even in their own voices. So become one of the Liberal Dan family, because family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. To hear those bad impressions and more, tune into the Liberal Dan Radio minicast. Talk from the left, that's right. And I think to myself, what a wonderful show. Yeah. If you enjoy Liberal Dan Radio, there's many ways that you can support the show. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can like me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter or TikTok. And you can become a Liberal Dan Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can get a shout out. Higher levels get the opportunity to vote on what I do next on the podcast, the minicast, or on YouTube. You can even buy commercial advertising or sponsor bits. So go to patreon.liberaldan.com and support the show today.
Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Demonox, host of The World According to Knox. It's time for Season 2, where I take you on another trip through my world. The world of movies, video games, pop culture, and more. Relate them to the world around you. Don't forget to leave a question for Marscat, and find me on Twitter by the handle XDeminox. That's the letter X like X-Men, DEMINOX. Now enjoy the rest of your podcast.
And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, it's 914-803-4131. That's 914-803-4131. I do want to give a shout out to Demonox, the first Liberal Dan Radio patron. Also, a big shouts out to Cesar over on California and your boy Chris for all being sponsors of the Liberal Dan Radio podcast. They are going to be getting a nice surprise in the mail soon. Something that I haven't announced on the Patreon yet. I don't know if I'm going to simply call them the Liberal Dan Radio OG Patreons, or maybe I might call them the Liberal Dan Radio Master Debaters. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what we're going to go for, but they're going to have a nice surprise in mail, and I'm going to keep that prize open after I show it off for a little bit, maybe till the end of the year. And if people who become Patreons for over a year, you may very well get that surprise too. So if you want to get in on it before I close the door on it, go to patreon.liberaldan.com or patreon.com/liberaldan and support the show today. Also, shout out to my little brother, the host of the most Nimbus with the smooth sounds of the Percy podcast. Again, hoping he comes back on the air with that soon. And hopefully we are going to, at some point, form Voltron soon as well and have a super show as well. Let's see, I'm failing. There we go. Failed to bring something back up. Bringing a boy in the Blog Talk Radio chat wants to know who I might be supporting when it comes to the replacement of Breyer. And one of the people that was being discussed is Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is the circuit court judge in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. court. And she's been there, and let's see, she was a district judge on the United States District Court for D.C. from 2013 to 2021, so she has experience as a judge, and she was just recently confirmed up to the circuit court, to the Court of Appeals, and she did get a bipartisan vote. I think she got 53 votes when that happened, very similar to what happened to Amy Coney Barrett, and she also clerked for Breyer. So she has that experience there, much like Kavanaugh clerked for Kennedy when before he got his nomination as well. So there's definitely a foundation there if Joe Biden wants to go ahead and support her for that. I think a lot of people think that she may very well be one of the people on the very short list that's there. Ketanji, Ketanji Brown Jackson. So that's how you spell her name, and so that is a potential somebody who might be a potential replacement. And she's if you look up Justice Breyer and replacements, I'm sure her name is going to be seen as in many of the short lists that people are going to be posting up there. So we'll see who Biden suggests. Biden, I say, is in a point in his presidency where he needs to get this done. This is one of the promises that he made, that he would put a black woman on the bench, because we haven't had one yet, and representation does matter. And of course, conservatives are probably going to be like, well, why does her color matter? It's not that specifically for her color, but there's not been a black woman on the bench, and there have been many qualified people who could have been but had not yet done so. So giving a black woman the opportunity to serve on the bench is going to be a good thing. Again, as long as the person is qualified, and from what I'm looking at from her experience as a judge, looks like she is qualified to sit on the bench and to hold that position. So we will see, and we will see if that happens and when that happens and how the vote goes down. I'm not worried about McConnell as much, because McConnell already has said, the Senate Republicans have already said, hey, we're not supporting any Biden nominees. We're not doing it. We're gonna drag our feet like we do all the time, and we'll make it so that the Democrats or liberals on the court have even smaller minority if we can help it. So really the only person that I think that I'd have to worry about, I'm not even worried about Sinema in this case. I think Sinema will do the right thing. I think Sinema will support the nominee. I don't think she's going to stop. It's just Manchin. Manchin's the problem. And we'll see if Manchin ends up being a problem or not. So anyway, we were talking about COVID before the break. And I had called in to the Jeff Career show on the 11th and basically said, hey, I understand your issues with vaccines. I don't agree with them, but I understand not wanting to get the kids vaccinated. I don't agree with your science. I don't agree with your conclusions, but I understand your argument. I understand your argument against masking. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's based in any sort of sound principles, but I understand it. And I don't understand, and I can't figure out why they're opposed to tests, to simply testing kids in school for COVID? And the answer I got, woo.
And now, words of Redneck wisdom, brought to you by Liberal Dan Radio.
I don't see the point in needing to test children for, again, something that, they're going to catch a cold. One of the number one, killers of children under 5 is pneumonia. Are we going through all this, hugabaloo for pneumonia, which is, spread the same way as the China virus? No, we're not. So this is not about the safety of our children. This is just one that's the test. It's about control. It's about all of it. And honestly, you may think I have a tinfoil hat on, but I have a feeling that they're also putting things on the swab of the test to make sure that the graphene oxide and other things that are in the vaccine are getting spread to our children regardless.
And this concludes Words of Redneck Wisdom, brought to you by Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left, that's right.
And there you go. So she's worried. Oh, I still have music to fade out of. So we can play the music a little longer. Anyway, so it's about control, A. So you would expect, okay, it's about control. That I understand that argument that they make. It's about control, and they're feared about control. But then it's, then she talks about pneumonia, and we'll be talking about pneumonia in a second again, because we've been covering pneumonia for this, and it looks like we do have Ken on the phone, so we'll go to Ken in a second. But we'll take the commercial break soon, and then we'll come out of break and we'll talk to Ken. But the other thing is that the graphene oxide that she claims is in the virus, and so she thinks that there's something in the swab that's going to help the graphene oxide in the vaccine take hold. So even if you're not vaccinating, if you're not vaccinating, then why are you worried about what's in the swab that might help the so-called graphene oxide? But guess what? The whole thing about the graphene oxide, I've covered this on the show before as well, that it's a myth. It's something that it was not even a study. One person claimed to have found graphene oxide, I think, in one used vial of the COVID-19 vaccine. It wasn't peer reviewed, and who knows who might have tainted that sample. So just, it's bizarre. Yes, I need to go invest in Reynolds Wrap because the amount of aluminum foil that has taken place. Now, to beat this dead horse, and maybe this will be the last week that we beat this dead horse, because again, the week of Christmas, we had brought up that the cases were going down of COVID deaths, that they were going down because our friends out in California, bringing a boy and his wife, they're bringing this to my attention, and I was like, well, I think we need more numbers to come in. I don't think all of the numbers are in yet. So we're now a month later, and in the data as of 12/29 was that the week ending in 12/25, we had 1,646 deaths, all COVID deaths involving COVID-19. Was 1,646. Now, for the week ending 12/25/2021, those deaths have now gone up to 9,342. So we've gained even more. I think even more than I predicted we would gain in those past weeks. And we've gotten up to, if you look at the same numbers, deaths involving COVID-19 and pneumonia was 5,500. Deaths involving pneumonia without COVID-19 was about 8,500. So basically about 3,000 deaths that week for pneumonia, just plain pneumonia, and then another 5,500 deaths from COVID-19 that were deaths that basically were the COVID-19 and the pneumonia were both present in the body, which means that COVID-19 again is causing more pneumonia than what. So when Michelle, the person who was talking on Words of Redneck Wisdom, wants to talk about, are we worried about pneumonia? Yes, we're worried about pneumonia. We're worried about the fact that COVID-19 seems to be having at least a correlation with increased pneumonia deaths based off of what the standard pneumonia deaths were, weekly pneumonia deaths before COVID-19 took place. 3,000 to 4,000 weekly pneumonia deaths was your average of what happened, caused by various reasons. You know, sometimes pneumonia deaths are caused by viruses. Sometimes pneumonia deaths are caused by bacteria. Sometimes pneumonia deaths are caused by fungus or mold or something else, maybe even allergies. There's lots of different reasons that you can get pneumonia, but it's clear that there are many, many more cases of pneumonia now simply because of COVID-19. So I think we should take that into consideration. And maybe this will be the last week I beat the dead horse. I don't know. Or maybe I'll have someone on to talk about pneumonia and COVID-19. We will see. But let's go ahead and take the next commercial break. And once we come out of the commercial break, we will be talking with Ken Good about charitable bail funds, bail bonds, etc. This is Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.
Yes, sir. Great. Sure. Great. Sounds good. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, give a listen, and follow at the Percy Podcast for more updates and information. Why not sit back and take a listen to one of the best podcasts you'll ever hear, and no one else will. Catch you on the tunes.
Do you want to set money aside for a rainy day? Do you want to open an account that will give you a savings bonus each month? What if I told you that you can get both and have a chance to win $10 million? YADA is an FDIC-insured bank, and when you go to yada.liberaldan.com, open an account, and make your first deposit, you will get 100 entries into the next weekly drawing. You will also get entries each week you have a balance. So go to yada.liberaldan.com. That's YOTTA.liberaldan.com. Using gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other nefarious tactics, the Republican Party has manipulated our electoral system to maintain as much control as possible despite being a party in the minority. Liberal Dan Radio seeks to change that, and I need your help in doing so. Liberal Dan Radio has partnered with Levelfield to help us use tools that are typically only available to big money donors. When you go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution, it will encourage other voters to reach out to their legislators to pass legislation to stop gerrymandering and voter suppression, and target elected officials who refuse to protect the vote. Every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot, and that ballot should have the same power as everyone else. I can't do this alone. I need your help. So please go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution today. That's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Political advertising paid for by Levelfield. Contributions are not tax deductible as charitable contributions.
And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left. That's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. I would say to join the conversation, it's 914-803-4131, but we're probably not going to take too many calls. I would suggest that if you do have a question for our guests, join us over either in the blogtalkradio.com chat. Go to blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan. Sign in with your free blogtalkradio.com account. Go to the episode page and you can join the chat room there. Or you can go to the YouTube chat, youtube.com/liberaldanradio. Go to the live stream right now and you can join us in the live chat and you can leave your questions there as well. And I'll try and get the answers to Ken as well. Ken Good is on the board of directors of the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. He graduated from Hardin-Simmons University in 1982 with a Bachelor's of Arts degree. He received a Master of Education degree in 1986 from Tarleton State University, part of the Texas A&M system. In 1989, he received his law degree from Texas Tech School of Law, where he was a member of the Texas Tech Law Review. Mr. Good has argued cases before the Supreme Court of Texas and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, along with numerous courts of appeals, including the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He is the author of Goods on Bail, a practice guide created for bail industry professionals. In addition, he has written numerous articles on the subject of bail reform, including what successful bail reform looks like. Mr. Good is married and has 2 daughters, and I'd like to welcome Mr. Good on the show. Thank you very much for calling in, and it's definitely going to be an interesting topic that I'm looking forward to discussing.
Well, thank you for having me. I would say after you go through the years and everything, I realize how old I am all of a sudden, and I feel much older than that.
Well, I mean, there are things that'll happen that'll make you feel old. Like, for example, this past December, my oldest son turned 13, and I'm like, oh, I have a teenager now. So Well, I was older when I got married, and so my kids are still young. I have my oldest is a junior in high school, but I have younger sisters and an older brother that have kids who are twice the age of my children. So, oh, wow.
Yeah, my children make me feel young.
Yeah. So, but let's see, a brief 20,000-foot view of the topic at hand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on anything. So, everyone has likely heard of bail, which is the amount of money that a defendant must pay to post to be released from custody until their trial. If a defendant can post bail, it gets returned to them if they attend all of their required hearings and trials. If they can't post bail, then they'll have to wait in jail until their court date. Some people can get a bail bond, which, depending on the state, could cost 10% or more up front. The bail bond company typically keeps that money for assuming the risk of putting up the rest of the bail for the defendant and assumes the responsibility for making sure that they end up in court. And there is a movement in this country to end cash bail, and some organizations that are fighting that fight are also collecting money to help pay bail for individuals who can't afford it for themselves. Some of the people released by these funds, however, paid for by these activists, have turned around and committed more crimes. Some of the notable cases are Donata Williams was arrested for burglary, and a $25,000 bond was set. The Bail Project got that reduced to $750 and then paid it. And then Williams allegedly lured 2 Indianapolis police to his house and stabbed them. Marcus Garvin was charged in a stabbing incident at a gas station. The Bail Project paid his bail, and he was released on GPS monitoring when he then cut off his ankle monitor and murdered his girlfriend. And those previous 2 stories I found on wishtv.com. And maybe the most notable case is Darrell Brooks. Brooks was initially freed from jail for a $1,000 bail after being accused of running over the mother of his child in his Ford Escape. And while nobody can answer why his bail was set so low, after Brooks was then accused of killing 6 people by running them over at the Wisconsin Christmas parade, a GoFundMe was started to post his bail, which GoFundMe stopped. A second GoFundMe was started to fund the bail fund. It didn't say that it specifically would be required to free Brooks, but it was the same amount of money that would be required to free Brooks. That GoFundMe was also taken down. So I guess my question to you, first of all, are these cases representative of a larger problem with bail funds, or are they outliers?
I think they are endemic of a larger problem. But let me say thank you for letting me come on your show. I enjoy talking to people about these issues, and I don't mind answering tough questions. But I think this is endemic, or these examples are endemic of a larger problem, because these bail funds are a solution looking for a problem. They raise large sums of money on the premise that these protests that happened in the summer of 2020 they were going to need lots of money to bail people out, and all those people were released on no bond, and their charges were dismissed, and so now they have all these sums of money, and it was intended to use for one purpose that never happened. So now they're looking for other places to put that money, and they're finding, just like the private industry, that jail's full of a lot of dangerous people, and the low-level people, they're not in jail anymore. They're not stuck in jail, and so they're continuing. So they're doing what they're not trained to do. They're bailing out dangerous people.
Okay, so one thing I did listen to the on your blog. I listened to the Bail Post podcast that had been posted, and that talked about the topic of charitable bonds. And it is said, again, they made the same point that bail funds were started as their justification to raise funds for low-level crimes. But according to one of the guests, they said typically low-level crimes are released on either on their own recognizance or on personal recognizance bonds, which basically means, if I'm correct, that they let them out, but you only have to pay if you don't show up. Is that right? On a PR bond?
You're let out and you're let out in your own promise to appear, and you only have to pay if you don't show up.
Okay, but according to the American Bar Association website, 75% of pretrial detainees have been charged, that are in the jail right now, have been charged with drug or property crimes. So they're not violent criminals per se, but they might not be like the people who are out for violating a curfew or something, or something that's also minor. But there are also many people who are sitting in pretrial detention who either don't have bond or can't pay their bond, and it's not because they're violent criminals, but they have other crimes that are not drug or property. So is there still low level? So it seems to, at least according to the American Bar Association, that there's a lot of low level people that are still in jail that still could potentially use these funds, that still could potentially need help.
No, I don't agree with that. And let me make 2 or 3 points. I think those are old numbers. Those are numbers pre the bail reform movement, because the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas has argued before the Texas legislature at least 3 different sessions, and in Texas they only meet every 2 years. So that's for the last 6 years, and he's been using the same number. And I know the number's been going down as a result of the changes that have been made, and just the pressure on judges to release more people, especially during the pandemic. The second point I would make is, I think it was also made on the podcast that you mentioned from the bail post, is there's this argument that these charitable bail funds are hurting the bail industry's business, and that's the reason why we're questioning what they're doing. That's not really true. I mean, they're bonding out people who would not otherwise get out of jail, and they're actually finding that those are the dangerous people. Those are the people that really should be in jail. And so they're not affecting our business very much at all, because they're bonding out people that we're not getting calls on because the family doesn't want to help them, because they've already used up the goodwill of the family, and because they are career criminals.
You beat me maybe to one of my questions that I was going to ask later, but we can talk a little bit more about that, about, I guess, the perception that might exist there. In the email that was when the individual reached out about the potential of being on the show, you have it was pointed out that maybe there are distinctions that can be made, like between like the Bail Project, the one. Now, I was not able to find a direct link between the Bail Project and was it Brooks? Yeah, and Brooks. Like, I think people were trying to, in support of Brooks, were trying to raise money for the Bail Project, but I couldn't find a link directly from the Bail Project to Brooks. But there was, the Bail Project did get Donata Williams out, Marcus Garvin out. So versus something like something which is, I guess, formerly called the Brooklyn Freedom Fund, which is now the Envision Freedom Fund. Are there differences between these funds? Are some of them better than others, in your opinion?
Well, I think that probably would depend on the various funds and where they're located and what their purpose is. The Bail Project has its stated goal to end cash bail, which is kind of interesting. It's a nonprofit charitable organization that helps poor people, but its stated goal is to end cash bail, where it doesn't have the ability or the resources to take our place. So really, that's an example of the bigger problem. People don't like cash bail; they want to get rid of cash bail, but there's nothing that has ever worked that's been proven that to take its place. And that's what we're seeing in these bail reform movements across the country, where New York tries simple release. Oh, we don't need bonds, and we'll just simply release people. Well, and that causes people not to show up for court, and that causes crime to increase because they see it as a green light. And you see people standing on the courthouse steps saying, I've been released 85 times for bail reform. I love bail reform in New York. And then you see it in Harris County, too, where the DA issues a report saying that misdemeanor bail reform has caused crime to increase. And it's because they don't have anything that's known to have worked or been proven to work to replace us with. They just keep saying we got to get rid of them, and everything that they do to try to replace it just makes the system completely worse. That's the reason why the bail industry has been around for 200 years. We do one thing, and we do it well.
But the bail industry initially started off as more of like, I think, is it not true that when bail started, that they started and it was basically pretty much all like PR type bonds? Like they all were basically like you were let out. Okay.
No, when bail started in the United States, it was when you bailed someone out, if they didn't show up for court, you took their place. So it was a much more severe consequence. 200 years ago, if you spoke up for somebody and you got them out of jail, then they didn't show up, you took their place. And we don't, thank goodness we don't have that anymore.
Well, sure.
Nobody would be getting out of jail. And the problem is, what we have is, how do we process large numbers of people through the county jail in our urban areas? If you take a step back, that's the huge problem that nobody can find a solution for, because we have in our urban areas, we have schools that failed, families that have failed, drugs are just running rampant, there's no jobs, and also through the protests, the fires, businesses, some of those are not coming back, so there's even less jobs. And so now, what do we do with them when we get them in the criminal justice system? Sometimes that's their last opportunity to become productive citizens, and we're just letting them down on that phrase as well. And so historically, how have we done it? Individual magistration always works. It's constitutional, and using a bail schedule is what the courts have been looking at for the last few years, and that's what Harris County is focused on. And now we're going through this period of simple release, which has been a fiasco everywhere it's been tried. And so that's really the problem. How do we process large numbers of people through our jails in the urban areas? And that's the problem that our elected officials just can't seem to fix. And it's become now hyper politicized. And so we have these groups like, charitable bail funds that are coming in to try to assist. But then we're hyper politicizing them as well, where we have the Bail Project, who, it's an admirable goal to want to help people, but it doesn't fit with that mentality to say, well, we want to get rid of cash bail as well. We should all be working together if that's truly your goal. But I think the Bail Project specifically has been on the record as saying that, they kind of want to stir things up, and they don't mind. They stand by their work when they get dangerous people out of jail and they commit further crimes. So I think I question the motives of the Bail Project especially.
Now, when you say like some, I think in Harris County they had something like simple release, like where people would just be released, I guess, with no bail. Would this be all criminals or all people? I guess I don't even want to say all criminals, because many of these people have not yet been convicted of a crime yet. They're waiting for to be set, tried and potentially convicted of a crime, but many of them have not been convicted yet. Are they releasing all types of crimes, like violent and non-violent, or how does that figured out, I guess, in what you've dealt with when they just release the people?
In Harris County, it works for misdemeanor courts and misdemeanor charges. All misdemeanors except for 7 charges that are on a specific list get released on a $100 PR bond, and they never see a magistrate. And that's part of the problem. No one is looking at their criminal history. No one is looking to see if these are career criminals, gang members, or organized crime members. And in fact, it's so bad that the legislature has come in and passed a new law that requires, as of April the 1st, that you have to review criminal history before you can release somebody. So the way Harris County is doing simple release is, if it's a misdemeanor and it's not on this list of 7 charges, you get released on a $100 PR bond. You never see a judge. There's no gatekeeper, and you're just out of jail.
And
no matter how many times you commit that crime.
So like somebody could now, are there, so somebody, let's say is like a drug charge. Someone might like get like a possession of like marijuana or something, and then they get caught with that. They give them $100 PR bond, and then like they don't show back up again, and then they get caught with marijuana again, and then they get another $100 PR bond. Like, is it like those type of criminals that are being let go, or are they like getting out on like a marijuana charge, for example, and then like going to commit some other more dangerous crime?
No, the marijuana charges are not being prosecuted anymore. And those charges, I think either they're not, Harris County is no longer prosecuting those, or if they are, they're giving them a citation. And if they go to a class, then their ticket or their case is dismissed. But for the most part, marijuana charges are not being prosecuted in Harris County anymore, and that's part of my criticism of what's going on. You've got, Harris County that's not prosecuting certain crimes, and then right next door to it, either Brazoria County or Montgomery County is, and so I think that just undermines the criminal justice system overall, because criminals see this uneven prosecution of crimes or disproportionate prosecution of crimes, and so it just undermines the system in all. Now, I understand why they do it. They want to set priorities, but the real reality goes back to the original problem. How do you process large numbers of people through the jail and handle large numbers of cases? And so they're electing not to prosecute certain crimes. I understand that.
Well, my point, though, if I may interrupt, my point more was less about the specific crime of marijuana, but so I'm just something that might be a crime that's not like a danger to other people, but something that might be a small low-level crime, that's not a violent crime. Are they like whatever? Give me an example of a crime that would get $100 personal recognizance. Give me what would be an example of one that would get?
Misdemeanor theft, and as long as you commit a misdemeanor theft over and over and over, then you're just going to get released on a $100 PR bond because you've never seen a magistrate. Nobody's ever seen your criminal record. The problem is the recidivism. The DA issued a report saying that there is a high level of recidivism, and that as long as you have this revolving door, the career criminals or the organized crime or gang members see this as a green light. Hey, I don't have any consequences, so I'm just going to keep doing this, and it's going to build. They're going to get more arrogant, and they start committing more crimes. In Harris County, they have a list of 158 people, or more than 150 people, who have been killed by somebody who was out on multiple PR bonds or multiple low bonds. And some of them, there's multiple cases where they were already out on bond for capital murder, and they could kill somebody else. And I question why we're letting someone who's accused of capital murder out of jail, and then I really question why we're letting them out to kill again.
Well, that would bring me later. I think Arizona, if I'm correct, has a potential ballot initiative up, which would end cash bail, but would basically say if you have certain crimes that are violent crimes like murder, rape, child molestation, that sort of thing, those people would not be able to be let out, while people with lower level crimes would always be let out. What do you feel about those types of?
Well, I mean, that's really a transition to the federal system for bail. It's either release or detain. But the problem is the federal system has a 70% detention, and if we applied that to Arizona or Texas, I mean, they're not going to spend enough money to detain 70% of the people they arrested. And so I don't think it's workable on the state level. I don't know if they have actually passed whether they're going to have a ballot initiative. I did know that there was a chance that they would let their voters vote on it. I know law enforcement press is in favor of that because they want more people detained. But the problem is I think that leads to chaos because really, we all want to detain the dangerous people. We all want to let the people that are not dangerous go. But the problem is, how do you predict which one's which? I mean, we've had this whole thing for the last few years about a risk assessment. That's been debunked. That scientists don't use it, and we still have people pushing it today. But if we could have a crystal ball that could tell us who the dangerous people are and who are not, then we would know who to detain, but we don't. And so we have to just draw the line and hope and pray for the best, and we have to set in protections. The problem that we have is the opposite. We're wanting to put in protections for the poor, which are tying the hands of the judges so they can't even do anything against organized crime, or career criminals. And then, I was having a conversation with someone today that was very similar to what you were saying. Well, it's just a property crime. Those aren't dangerous people. And I'm like, we've heard that for several years now. Well, we just want to put in jail the people we're scared of, not the people we're mad at. Well, you know what? Career criminals are hearing that. And they're saying, I can make you pretty mad and I can still not go to jail. No, that's what's causing these problems. That's why California is having endemic crime, is because they've decriminalized crime below $950. And people are seeing that and say, hey, I can get away with crime. I can get away with every day. and you see stores closing in San Francisco because they have $25,000 of shoplifting a day, and they can't afford that. They can't afford to operate in that environment. And so we can't just say, oh, this is property crime, it's no biggie, we're just, that's nothing. No, that's something. We've given all these people a green light, and if we don't stop that, then our country, our society is just going to get more and more chaotic. And we have to figure out a way to address these things.
I definitely don't agree with just basically saying, theft is okay. Like I don't want to ever give the message that theft is okay. What about the argument though? Like you brought up the poverty argument. A lot of people will make the argument that a bail system disproportionately harms poorer people than, if you're a wealthy person, you commit the same crime as a poor person, and you get a wealthy person might be able to pay the bail no problem, can continue on with their life while waiting for the trial to take place. Meanwhile, a poor person might have to sit in jail for days, weeks, months, maybe even, however many long it's going to take for the trial to start if they can't afford. So somebody who hasn't been proven guilty in a court of law, they can't earn money because they're stuck in jail, so they can't pay money to support their families while they're waiting for the trials to be heard. And then, according to a Vera Institute study, people detained for longer periods of time are more likely to be convicted. They're more likely to receive harsher sentences than people who can either pay bail or are never forced to pay bail. And recidivism rates are also higher among those people. So what would you say about those arguments?
Okay, I have very little respect for the Vera Institute. I think they're wrong more than they're right, and when they're right, they harm the criminal justice system more than they help it. And let me just give you one example. They went on the record saying, well, any criminal justice reform is going to create a system of a 40% failure to appear rate, and that should be okay. A 40% failure to appear rate will shut down any criminal justice system. Could you imagine you have 1,000 cases set on a week and 400 fail to appear? That means 400 cases have to be set on hold. And then you go to the next week, you have 1,000 new cases, and you still got the 400 from last week. So you got 1,400 cases. And it just steamrolls every week, and so you get higher and higher backlogs. So I don't have a very high opinion of the Vera Institute. On your basic argument about poverty, I would say, let's say the longer criminal sentence. Career criminals are more likely to be in jail longer. Career criminals are people who are more likely to commit crime. Career criminals who are in jail longer because they have a higher bond are going to have more recidivism because they're career criminals. But you look at the Vera Institute and they're like, oh, people who are in jail longer are going to be hurt more. Yes, because they're career criminals. They're more likely to be career criminals. I don't agree that first-time offenders who have a job are stuck in jail. I just don't believe that. I think that is a myth. I think that especially during this time, that is just not true. And I would say that the basic argument on whether somebody's poor, we need protections for the poor. But what are those protections? I don't think the Constitution has a right to release. The Constitution has a right to a hearing. And, the basic argument that we keep hearing from the other side is poor people should not be stuck in jail. There's not a right to release. The Fifth Circuit has ruled that there's no right to release from jail. There's a right to a hearing. Ability to pay is only one consideration. So if I look at you and you have a criminal history, Liberal Dan, and you have 4 priors in the last 5 years, your bond's going to be higher. I don't care what your ability to pay is, your bond's going to be higher. And if I set it because of your criminal history and you can't pay it, well then the constitutional requirements have been met, and you don't if you can't afford it, then you're stuck in jail, and it's because of your criminal history, not because of your ability to pay. Our friends on the other side would say that's not right and that should violate the Constitution, and that's the fallacy. That's where that just blows up the entire criminal justice system if we can't hold somebody in jail who's a danger to the community. And that's where they're wrong, and that's where they misrepresent the law, and that's where it's ridiculous that we can't agree on what the law is even.
Well, the Fifth Circuit is probably one of the most is probably one of the most, if not the most, conservative ones in the country. But and and I understand the argument of there's no right to be released or whatever. There's a right to have a hearing, but there are cases and individual cases are not necessarily proof. They might be anecdotal, but I was reading some of the cases, like some local New Orleans cases where you had. I think it was on the Vera Institute website, but it was, there was, I guess there's a branch here in New Orleans. So I was looking at some of the local people and who were telling their own stories. And like one of them was like, the guy was like, okay, I didn't have any money. I couldn't really afford anything. So instead of dealing with, trying to sit in jail and having to fight this for days, weeks, months, however long it was going to take for the trial to be adjudicated, he just copped a plea. So basically, so yeah, fine, I'll cop a plea. I'll admit to doing this so I could get on with my life. But then, okay, so he cops a plea because he can't afford, to wait, and he can't afford to sit in jail and to do it because he has to take care of his family. Well, now what happens if he gets arrested another time for something else that maybe he didn't do, I don't know, but now he has a previous record because he pleaded guilty to something else. So the cycle, to me at least, there's some issues that with poverty that poverty just kind of tends to breed crime in and of itself, and so people who have less money have less access to fair trials. And I would say that we not only do we have a right to have a hearing, we have a right to fair hearings, right, in the Constitution.
Sure. I mean, I agree with what you're saying to a certain extent. I mean, the problem I have is when people say this is not fair. Well, I disagree with that. It is the fairest system in the world. Can it be improved? Do we need to tweak it? Absolutely. We always look to improve it. But we don't want to set up a system on the pretext that we want to protect the poor that then ties the hands of the judges so that they can't do anything about career criminals, gangs, or organized crime. And that's the problem with the latest wave of bail reform. We're like in New York. No, we're going to require the judge to release somebody on no bond if they're charged with a certain list of crimes, no matter how many times they've been charged with that. You can't take into consideration their criminal history. In Harris County, the same thing. And so we're tying, on the pretext of protecting the poor, we're tying the hands of the judges, so public safety is sacrificed. And I think, so we're drawing the line in the wrong place. And we have to reevaluate what we're doing. And I think the lesson for the last 2 years is public safety has to come first. And then we have to look at what we're doing to make it better.
So, but should there be any sort of like, all right, so let's say, like, should there be any sort of consideration as to how much the amount of bail is set would have an impact on a person? So where like an individual who might be in poverty might have a certain bail number, but a person who's like wealthy who commits the same crime might have a higher amount of bail because because it'll make it, because if somebody's rich and can pay the bail off that they've been assessed, that doesn't necessarily, it's a different burden, I guess. So like, do you believe in any sort of?
But what you're saying is, let's treat everybody the same, and I don't look at it that way. What I look at it is, let's just use a random number. Harris County, they arrest on average 1,000 people a week at one point in time. So I look at it as the magistrates have 1,000 people to work through the jail in a week. And so if I can divert people away from magistration based on their criminal history, so if you're a first-time offender for this crime, here's what your bond is. If you're a second-time offender or you have been arrested more than that, here's what your bond is. And I can divert away from magistration all the people who can afford to post that bond pursuant to a bail schedule. Then the magistrate has all this extra time to look at people and say, okay, you're claiming that you're poor, and let's talk about this. I mean, if we don't divert people away from magistration and we're dealing with 1,000 people a week or more, then the magistrates it's just chaos. The magistrates have very little time. They can't differentiate between anybody, let alone criminal histories. And so it's just what we're getting, chaos. And so what we're looking at it in the wrong way. We have to divert as many people away from magistration as can afford it, so we can spend what limited time we have, what limited resources we have, on allowing the magistrates to use their discretion on the people who are left, who are saying, I can't afford that amount. And so they can look at them and they can have a hearing and they can make the determination that you're suggesting and I'm agreeing should be made. I'm just saying we can't treat everybody the same way. We have to divert people away. And then when everyone gets to their initial appearance, then the court can reevaluate and say, do we need a higher bond for you? But, we've got to divert people away from magistration. This concept that we have to treat everybody the same is what's creating this problem in our urban areas, because this political correctness is preventing us from diverting people away from magistrate, except by simple release, which is the problem right now.
Now, when you say treating people the same,
everybody the same.
Well, like when you say treating people the same, like I don't necessarily think you should treat everyone the same. In that, like if somebody's having a bail or set for I don't know, like some low-level crime. I don't want whatever low-level crime is versus murder. Like I don't think they should be treated the
assault.
same.
Let's just say two assaults.
Well, yeah. But if you have two assaults or two rapes, I don't think that is it a problem in the overall justice system that you might have a poorer person, I think all rapists should be punished severely under the law, but you have what's his face, the swimmer guy, the one that like sexually assaulted the victim behind the dumpster or whatever, who pled and like,
sure,
I forget his name. I'm forgetting his name. But what I'm talking about. Like
I do.
Like he was able to get off in the system. He was able to get off in a system because he had the money to get off in a system. Whereas, and I'm sure he was able to,
because the judge said he had a bright future. But I think I'm kind of sensing that you and I would agree that someone with a criminal history of doing this same crime before should be treated differently, no matter their ability to pay, versus a first-time offender. I think you and I would agree on that.
Well, I would think non-violent first-time offenders, like if we're going to keep all sorts of options of bail available, like I would think like a PR bond would be a reasonable thing for a first-time offender. If somebody who has no history of, as long as it's not a severe enough of a crime.
Bond, well, a low bond or a PR bond for a first-time offender, we're not going to have any. The point I'm trying to make is, you've got two people. They're both. One is rich and the other is poor. One of them has a substantial criminal history for whatever reason, and the other one does not. I think we should be able to agree that the first-time offender should have a lower bond than the other person who has a substantial criminal history, and that is completely separate and apart from their ability to pay.
Sure, I can agree on that. I can agree that.
And so whether the first-time offender is the person who has money, that doesn't change the fact it should be a low bond. And if the first-time offender is the one the one with the substantial criminal history has money, then it should be a higher bond. But the same is also true if the person is claiming poverty. To me, the most important part of setting bail is criminal history. The Texas legislature just passed, and it goes into effect on April 1st, a requirement that judges must review criminal histories before setting bail. I think that is the number one most important bail reform item that we've seen in Texas in the latest round of bail reform. And I think you will find that if judges would look at criminal histories, that would be determinative of bail more than anything else. And I think this argument about poverty is one of the elements that to be taken into consideration, but it is overshadowed by your criminal history and should be.
I think it's fair to say. I think that on certain parts that we agree on that if somebody if you're gonna sit there and say somebody just keeps doing the same thing over and over again, and you like what sure. Einstein said, if you can't do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result. So if somebody skips bail 3 times, you don't expect them that they're gonna not skip bail the 4th time. So I think it's
it's worse than that. it's worse than that right now. In Harris County, there's a 80-year-old woman who was killed in the parking lot of Walgreens, and the guy that killed her was 30-something years old. He had a criminal history of being arrested over 70 times, and at the time he killed this woman, he was out on 2 felony PR bonds. That guy should have never been out of jail, and at 35, have a criminal history of being arrested over 70 times. This is what we're saying. And the push.
So he was arrested 70 times. Was he ever?
We got to treat everybody.
He was arrested 70 times. Was he ever convicted of anything? Just to.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So he was not just because when somebody says somebody's been arrested so many times, that's less important to me than how many times they've been convicted. So like, what was he convicted of previously before? Do you remember?
Yeah. I mean, he'd been to jail before. I mean, he'd served time before.
Okay.
I believe.
But you don't
so,
remember?
I mean, this isn't just, he's, no, I don't remember specifically, but I mean, but I do, I mean, come on, you're 30-something years old, you got a criminal history of arrest 70-something times, and I mean, this is a guy that had some mental issues as well, which is a bigger issue. We don't even have time to go into all that. We're turning our jails into the largest mental health facilities in the country. And that's not right. We wouldn't have a jail overcrowding problem if we just put our mental health patients somewhere else and not jail. But, this isn't the topic for that. I mean, if you just come down to the problem that we're facing, I mean, I think all of this bail reform is really the tough question is how do you process large numbers of people through our urban area jails quickly and efficiently? And we haven't found an answer to that.
Well, I kind of disagree, though. I kind of disagree.
And it doesn't work.
I kind of disagree with you. I do think it is relevant because if we have, even on your own article about criminal justice reform in general, you do state, you mentioned that, and part of your criminal justice reform is on, treating mental health patients differently and putting them in mental health facilities and not jails. There was a big issue about that locally in a New Orleans race for a sheriff over whether or not a local we should be building a mental health facility versus improving the jail system, or how we deal with people with mental health issues. And I think if we handled mental health in this country better as a whole, I think that might, and allow people to deal with their mental health issues. I think you might reduce the amount of people that are going through the system because they haven't gotten the help that they need.
Oh, I agree with you completely. My point was, I don't know if today is the time to address that issue, but I agree with you completely on that. But the problem is cost. We already have these jails, and at the time we started putting people in jails, mental health people in jails, we had room for them, but now we don't, and the jails are all full. But the problem we have is, how do you get a mental health patient on their medications? That's the problem we have. We have a cycle right now. You get them in jail, you get them on their drugs, they get under control, they realize what's happened, they get out of jail, they get off their medications, they go crazy, and then they do something, they go back to jail, and we have this cycle going on and on and on, and that has to be broken. But that's a separate issue from how do we address criminal justice reform, bail reform, because we're talking about pre-conviction incarceration. I think that the proposals that we're looking at right now have just made the process or made the situation worse instead of better. And, what's the old adage? The first rule of any reform is do no harm. Well, we have friends on the other side who are advocating changes that are causing a lot of harm instead of building on what's worked for over 200 years.
Now, there was in my research for the show, because I was, I'm coming to the show as somebody who hasn't spent his life working with bail bonds and on this issue. So I had to do a crash course, so to speak, on and try and find as much as possible from both sides, which is why I listened to the podcast on your site, why I read a bunch of stuff on your site. I got the Arizona thing from your site. There's another, there was a study, I think University of Pennsylvania and George Mason University found that elimination on cash bail for dozens of non-violent offenses, I think misdemeanors except for specific 7 or specific 12, they had seen that in those specific cases, that there was, at least I guess maybe I don't know if it was just in Philadelphia specifically, but that they're saying it had zero effect on court appearance rates on those lower level ones. Do you think that's wrong? Do you think that's an outlier? Do you think that's, maybe there's something that we're missing or that I'm missing from that quote?
I do. Yes, I do think that's wrong, because what we're seeing, like in Harris County, failure to appear rates for PR bonds has skyrocketed, and the failure to appear, they have over 50% of dockets failing to appear, and that, the problem, it all comes down to accountability. So if I don't show up for court and you hold me accountable, which means you revoke my bond, you take me to jail, and then maybe you give me another chance, but you say, look, if you do not come, there will be consequences. I think you're going to have a different result. And I think in a lot of situations where we have bail reform, that's the problem. That's what's missing. We don't have any accountability. So like in Harris County, they've even tied the judge's hands. Someone has to miss court 3 times before they can do anything about it. And even though the law says when you miss once, you're required to issue a warrant. So they're not following Texas law, and they're hurting themselves. Anytime a case gets put on hold, anytime someone misses court, their case is put on hold, and you have to wait for them to come back, whether it's an hour, whether it's a day, whether it's 2 months. And it's ridiculous. Look at the situation we're creating. The defendant doesn't show up. Their case is put on hold. No matter how many times they do it, their case is put on hold. But what happens if the victim doesn't show up for court when they're requested? Well, then the defendant's case gets dismissed. It's just a ridiculous situation where we have one standard for the victims of crimes and we have another standard for the defendants. In fact, the LA DA has come out and just said, well, we have a different opinion about who the true victim is. They believe the criminals are the victims, not the people who were the subject of the crime that was committed.
Well, the right to a fair trial in and of itself is a right that belongs to the criminal, not a right that belongs to the victim, right?
Well, no. The right to a trial belongs to every citizen. So you have a right to confront your witnesses. You have a right to trial. But yes, we've set up a system where we could try somebody in abstention if they don't show up for court, but we don't do that. We put their case on hold. We wait for them to come back, but then we don't give the same leniency to the people who have been the victim of the crime. They're told to show up on this date, and if they don't, well, then the DA can't prove the case, and so the case gets dismissed. So it's a stilted, one-sided system. And like in LA right now, I would argue that there's nobody in the courtroom arguing for the victim, because the DA is siding with the criminal. Well, they've got their own attorney. Now they have 2 attorneys. Who's arguing for the victims in those cases? I would argue in LA nobody is right now.
Okay. I don't, because normally, the way I look at most crime thing is usually it's not the victim versus it's the state versus the person. So it's, but yeah,
but the state is there for the victim. The state's arguing for the victim, for society, for the victim.
Right.
That's the only voice for the victim in the courtroom is the state.
Yeah,
and if the state decides that they're going to side with the criminals on criminal justice reform and that they're the real victims, well, then nobody is in the courtroom arguing for the victim of the crime.
Well, is it as black and white as that though? Like, can we both say that somebody can be a criminal but still not be treated fairly within the system? Like they can be both. They could be a criminal and a victim. They could be, if people, I think traditionally in this country we've had situations where, persons of color have gotten disproportionate sentences on many certain things and disproportionate maltreatment within the system even before their cases go to trial. So people who are criminals can also be victims. And while there may not be, my friends on the other side of the aisle might not care as much as, I don't care that so-and-so isn't being treated fairly, but, because ultimately they should have never committed their crime. That's the argument that I often hear from my friends on the other side of the aisle. We should still be treating people equitably within the system, and same crime should have same punishment, all other things being equal. And too many times there are things that make them not equal. And I think that's maybe definitely what a lot of the people who see the problem, who have problems with like our cash bail system, they'd probably be like, look, this system is disproportionately making it harder for on people who are poor and people of color who, Black, Indigenous, other persons of color, they are more likely to are disproportionately poor, and as such they're disproportionately be harmed, but or suffer or struggle to try and make bail or get a bail bond or be able to get out and continue to work whilst waiting for their trial date. So therefore that's going to perpetuate, because then they're going to be even poorer because their family can't afford that. So it's kind of that kind of snowballs as well. I think that's sort of what they look at when they say, okay, well these people are not being treated fairly. It's not that they're justifying the criminal acts, at least in my mind. I'm not justifying the criminal acts, but still it's still perpetuating the harm that could be done, and by not being able to afford those things and not being able to afford better attorneys, not being able to afford to navigate themselves through the system like other people might have, at the end of the day they are going to get longer jail sentences and harsher penalties, and those are going to snowball on each other and potentially create more career criminals, because then now that's what they know, that's what they are. So the system is basically expecting it out of them, and then they turn out to be what they expected to be. So I'm not coming down on, and I haven't necessarily come down on the yes we should get rid of all cash bail side, or no we can't whatever. I see what happened, with the attempt, I guess, to raise money for Darrell Brooks, and I was like, that's ridiculous. There's no reason there. Like I was wondering why there even was a $250,000 bail or $5 million or whatever it was the second time around for Darrell Brooks. Like, to me, there should have been no bail, at that point, because he committed a crime. He allegedly committed a crime, and then he goes and he's alleged to run over 6 people. I think at that point, no bail. But so in some cases, I'm like, yeah.
So let me make a couple points, and I think the first point I would make is, a lot of your issues about that you've raised about people who are poor have worse consequences, and I would just point out that a lot of the reforms that are being pushed are intended, or they're being offered to address those arguments. And my point on that is we just do not want to push the pendulum so far that through those policy changes, the argument that we have to do this because people are poor, we don't want to tie the hands of judges so that they can't address career criminals, gang members, or people who are members of organized gangs. So that's the first thing I would say. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing where the reforms are being pushed, and they're being pushed with well-intended arguments, very similar to what you're making. But the effect of the change is we're tying the hands of the judges so they can't even address people that you and I would agree on. We agree career criminals shouldn't be treated the same way. They should have more substantial bail. But we're setting up a system that ties the hands of the judges in those situations. And then the second point I would make on the arguments that you've made is we want to make sure that any system we set up satisfies the constitutional requirements. And we've had an argument for the last 2 years about whether bail is substantively constitutional, whether it's constitutional on its face. And we've been told that we have to change everything we're doing because bail is going to be held unconstitutional. We've now had 2 courts of appeals, the Fifth Circuit, yes, they're one conservative court, but another one, I think it's the 10th court, has held bail constitutional. So I think we all agree bail is substantively constitutional. So and then the courts, multiple courts have held you have a right to a hearing, and it's a robust hearing, which I guess what would be what you said would be a fair hearing or an honest hearing, and I agree with that. And then I would come down to, are there always outliers, or are there times when we can do better? Yes. But I'd still come down to, we have the fairest system in the world, and we need to build off what works, and we need to get rid of what doesn't. But we don't need to tie the hands of judges like we're doing right now, and that really just gives a green light for crime to increase, and that's what we're seeing, and we've got to stop that.
Okay, and then kind of rolling back to a point that you had made earlier that I kind of wanted to, or one of the two things I wanted to end with. The first of all being, I had individually, before you said it, came up with the idea that not necessarily saying that your desires here are not public safety. I believe that you truly believe that this is for public safety. But there are people who would probably assume, again, as you mentioned before, that if cash bail was ended, or if people can get bail from cash bail funds and don't need bail bonds, then that would, again, what do you say to the people who might say, well, that would be bad for the people that you represent, that would be bad for your clients, that would be bad for the bail bondsman industry, and you being a board member of, was it Texas, the board of directors of Professional Bondsmen of Texas, you want bail bondsmen to be able to do their job. So what would you say to the people who might say, well, that might be skeptical of the reasons why you might be against these things, because there's I guess financial incentives for bail bondsmen to be able to continue to be in business, and if there's no more bail, then there's no more bail bondsmen.
Well, I would say, I've only been doing bail for like 20 years. I've been an attorney for 30 years. And as you pointed out earlier, I'm a very old man, or I feel like I'm an old man if you're listening to those dates. But I would say bail's been around for 200 years. And it's been around for 200 years for a reason. And the reason is it does a good job, does one thing, does it well, gets people to court. Bail funds don't have the ability, if we bond somebody out, or if they bond somebody out and they see that they're starting to use drugs again, if they see that they're going where they're not supposed to be, we have the ability in Texas to go to the court and say, court, you need to issue a warrant. You need to get little Johnny in here because he is not doing what he's supposed to be doing, and the court can do that. A bail fund cannot do that, not authorized by law to do it, because when they post a cash bond, the surety's the cash, not them. And so they don't have the ability, they don't have the experience. And so, yeah, they think they can replace us? Yeah, right. I mean, they've tried. I mean, do you think this is the first time that criminal justice reform has tried to replace bondsmen? I mean, we are a necessary evil because we don't cost the taxpayers anything, and we have the lowest failure to appear rate of anything in use. And so you want to get your cases through the system, you use us. And I would just say we're the grease that keeps the criminal justice system moving. And if you don't want people, or if you don't care if defendants show up for court, well, then, yeah, you don't need us, because that's what we do. But if you care whether people show up for court, you want your cases to shorten the time from filing to getting them resolved, you need to push more people or encourage more people to post surety bonds. You want to post a surety bond, you can be a lower amount. Every state has the system or the ability to lower a bond, and that just is another level of supervision, another level of eyes watching somebody, and that's going to get your people to court. Bail funds, I don't believe the Bail Project is well intended because they've declared war on us and we haven't done anything to them. But there are well-intended bail funds who would do a very good service by bonding out someone who has a drug problem, getting them to rehab, and getting them straightened out, and getting them training, and getting them jobs, and becomes productive members of society. We would all be celebrating them. But instead, they're deciding, hey, we're going to set up a GoFundMe to try to raise money off of this guy that ran over a bunch of people in a parade, and we're going to declare war on this group that's been around for 200 years. I mean, they're not acting in good faith, and they're the new kids on the block, and they're pretty arrogant, and those people usually aren't around very long. I mean, if you listen to our podcast, bail funds have been around for a long time, and they're cyclical. Something happens, they raise money, then they either waste it or lose it, and they go away. Something happens, some new ones come up, they raise money. And so right now we got bail funds with a bunch of money, and over the next couple of years you're going to hear people, there's going to be scandal, or just like some other groups, they're going to be buying big houses, or they're going to be, I think one project or one group is paying large sums of money to staff all of a sudden. The money's not going to be around much longer, and as they're bonding out dangerous people, fewer and fewer people are going to want to be contributing to them. And so their days are numbered, as I see it, just as they've been in the past, over and over. And so I think they're a limited problem for a limited time, and then that will go away. And all the, what are you going to do then? Well, you're going to continue to use what we've used for 200 years, the private bail industry.
And I guess finally, has your industry or tried to maybe reach out to any of these funds and be like, how could we work together to to make this system better, to say, okay, well, here's certain things that we feel are necessary within the system. Here's where we think they could improve. Here's where we could work together. Do you have or can you at least maybe list something that maybe you feel that they do have a point on that does need to be fixed, or that where you could be like, yes, we agree on this, so let's do this, but not this, that, the other, for lack of a better way of explaining it.
I think bail funds need to be more transparent, and I don't think they should be opposing regulations that just require them to be more transparent. Texas passed a statute that went into effect just this month, requiring them to report the people they bond out of jail and to post certain get a certificate from the county. I mean, I don't think they should oppose stuff like that. I had a client in December call me, and a bail fund had called them and wanted to pay them to bond out 30-something people in December. And so instead of posting 30-something cash bonds, they wanted to pay the bondsman 10%. And they had never had that call before, and they asked me what to do. And I'm like, you've been called to ask to post 30 bonds. Evaluate them on whether you believe that those are good bonds. If you believe they are, then post them and let them pay the fee. I mean, bail funds don't realize if they could go get a lot more bang for the buck by going through a bondsman and working with us instead of declaring war and saying we're the evil Satan, when we are the number one source for getting people out of jail and to court and getting cases to resolution.
So, and that's a fair point. I do remember hearing that point on the podcast that they could probably get much more bang for their buck if they paid the bail itself, the bail bonds fee, instead of paying. I guess the point on the other hand was if they, to me, if I was running a bail fund and I wanted my bail fund to be operating in long term and I was going to be posting bail, I would want the person to show up, because then I would want to get my money back so I could post bail for more people, instead of just throwing spaghetti at the wall.
But if I was running a bail fund, I would probably post a third of what I'm posting, because I would go all the way through. I'd bond them out, get them evaluated medically. I would find out all their issues, work them up, get them like a triage, get a plan for getting them taken care of, housing, and then I would present my cases of success to all these people who would be just forking over money for them because of all the good things they're doing. And I promise you, if I was running the bail fund, you wouldn't see any publicity on this killing people, and I'd be triaging people as I get them out of jail, and I would be all over them to find out what the problem is and get them straightened out. These bail funds could be doing that. They have the money to do that, and if they did, people would be contributing money left and right because of the success. There's a place for bail funds. We need that type of work because the government has failed at doing that. And so they could be doing a great service to society, and instead the bail projects declared war on the private cash bail system. My goodness gracious. Wake up, smell the coffee, do some good.
All right. Well, do you have any other points that you want to make before I go ahead and let you go? Or how else people can find out more information?
Oh, yes. They can. People, if they want more information on the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, they can go to our website, pptx.com. They can go to our blog, which is on that website, or they can visit our podcast, which is thebellpost.com. Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed this discussion. I always enjoyed arguing tough issues and answering tough questions, and you've been very nice and very civil. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and you have a great rest of your week. Stay healthy, stay safe.
You too, sir. You too, and your family as well.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. All right, and this has been, this has been a good episode. I really enjoyed it. Again, this is one of the examples of what I like to, showcase on Liberal Dan Radio is that, I can have people, where we agree on some things, but, I think we disagree on some things, and we're clearly, he's more conservative, I'm clearly more liberal. But at the end of the day, we can sit here and have a calm, rational, reasonable conversation about a topic, and we don't have to agree at the end of the day. But we can try and work and understand where the other people are coming from, and maybe find some common ground as well. So I think, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this particular topic on the show, because I think it's an important one. I think the topic of cash bail is important. I think the topic of bail bonds are important. I think. I see points on both sides that I agree with, and some things that I disagree with. I don't understand why anybody would be trying to. I mean, I guess if you felt that Darrell Brooks was being railroaded, I mean, maybe you might, be supporting of that. Maybe you just oppose the system, altogether, and just want to let everybody out. Which is just about as ridiculous as like some of the so-called men's rights advocates who want to, just free everybody who's charged with rape because they have a problem with false accusations or whatever. Completely different subject, but kind of the same principle where, you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Bringing Boy says, it was a good show, Dan, and you behaved. I always behave. I'm a well-behaved individual. I like to keep things rational and cool and calm, and I don't want to. I like the fact that people who are conservative can feel free that they can come on the show and, for the most part, have a reasonable and rational discussion, unless you come on as a drunk Nazi like that one woman did from Pennsylvania way while ago. If you remember the last time we had kind of Voltron on the show early on, maybe a year or two ago now. Whoa, that was a long time ago. I need to find that clip of the drunk Nazi that called into the show because, woof, she was crazy. Anyway. This is the end of this week's episode of Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left, that right. I'll be back next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central. blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan, youtube.com/liberaldanradio. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok as well. I don't know why this doesn't seem to be wanting to play the audio. I'm not hearing it. It's being maybe a technical glitch or whatever. Let's try and start it again. But again, Twitter, Liberal Dan Radio on Twitter, Facebook.com/LiberalDan, LiberalDan.com, Liberal Dan Radio on TikTok as well. For some reason, I'm just not hearing the audio, and I don't know why. Well, there it is. I hear it now. Anyway, again, thank you very much for listening. Remember, go to the Patreon if you want to be a Liberal Dan Radio OG or a Liberal Dan Radio Master Debater or whatever we're going to call it. It is what it is. You can follow the Patreon as well, and go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com to help me fight gerrymandering. Until next week, this is Dan Zimmerman with Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.